Okay, good afternoon to everyone, and thanks for being here in spite of the tragic news that is affecting all of us. Um, Today, we have the privilege to have with us Rob Wallace that will talk about Beyond One Health, circuits of capitalism and pandemics. Rob Wallace is an epidemiologist, evolutionary biologist, and visiting scholar at the Institute for Global Studies, University of Minnesota. And through his structural One Health approach, he connected the spread of infectious diseases to global economic forces, showing how industrial agriculture, deforestation, and neoliberal policies contribute to emerging health crises. He is the author of numerous scientific articles and influential books, some of them, if I may add, quite provocative, but always very informative and evidence-based. Some of his books include The Fault in Our SARS, COVID-19 in the Biden era, Dead Epidemiologists on the Origins of COVID-19, Big Farms Make Big Flu, Dispatches on Infectious Diseases, Agribusiness, and the Nature of Science, and Neoliberal Ebola, modeling disease emergence from finance to forest and farm. Dr. Wallace's groundbreaking contributions have received ample media coverage, particularly in the wake of the COVID-19 outbreak. And in 1921, The Nation dedicated an editorial to his work, highlighting his remarkable insights into the systemic drivers, capitalism, neoliberalism, and the connection with deforestation, industrialized animal farming behind today's global health crisis. Without further ado, please welcome Rob Wallace, that will start with a 25 minutes presentation, and then I will torture him with some questions. And you can also add your questions of your own. But thank you for being with us, Rob. If you want to share your slides and start your talk.
So I'm going to talk a little bit on One Health, or actually what a One Health could be. Now, what is One Health? One Health is a part of the health sciences dedicated to trying to get the health of animals and humans and wildlife and livestock interrelated to each other. But there's a bunch of things that are missing. And so this first few slides, or this 25 minutes of slides, are really just to get us thinking. You're not required to remember everything. It's just a kind of an introduction of the bigger picture of things, so you get the broad scope of what's required here. And long story short, Earth is planet Earth is fundamentally changing into planet farm, as far as industrial capitalism has us on track. We see that the millions of tons in biomass are concentrated among the livestock now, much more than in wildlife and people. And that is geographically spread across the world, where we have, although this is something of a composite of all sorts of livestock, cattle, cows, pigs, goats, and chickens. They're not quite the same kind of animal as it were in terms of their ecological impact. We see this spread across the world in terms of what is now the largest biome at this point, which is agriculture. 40% of the ice-free land is dedicated to agriculture, and in ways that humanity has never seen before. And we see this go hand in glove with the kind of increase in the input-output, meaning we have now fewer. This is the number of hog farms in the U.S. We have a grand decline in the number of farms from left to right there over time, while at the same time we have an increase in the number of head of hog, meaning the number of animals. And so, in other words, the fewer number of farms and greater number of greater amount of meat produced. And along with the consolidation of farms at the level of the landscape, we also have a consolidation at the level of production. And so we see that increasing consolidation of agricultural concerns into fewer and fewer corporations, and we see here for Hormel, Tyson Foods, and JBS this consolidation, following their kind of parlaying their economic power and also reversals in antitrust law. And that has led to an increasing in a kind of ecological kind of a consolidation in the sense of we have here the proportion of hogs that are produced have kind of doubled over the last 50 years, and the number of hogs that have been exported has been tripled. So again, we're back to the notion of a planet farm where the hog grown in one side of the world are transported to the other side. And along with that is that we have a change in the very nature of the kind of what constitutes living things. It isn't just about the landscape, and organisms are being transformed into what are called living fungibilities, meaning their nature is considered so largely, primarily around what kind of profit can you bring us in the next few months? What are your sales prospectus in the next few months, rather than, and this is and these sale prospectus and identities is assigned months before the animals are even born, or the crops are planted in the ground. And so, and this figure is kind of out of date because most of this trading is done on computer at this point. But we do get the sense that the very identity of the animals is primarily their economic face, rather than themselves as flesh living and beings. And we see this time and again. This is the bones of hens have been broken in the course of being forced to lay eggs, and at such a rate. We see those in the red there are damage to their pelvic bones in a way that you don't see on the left for an animal that's not raised under those conditions. Poultry thyroid, it's a gland in the neck that deals with growing patterns, have been selected to fail to recognize the amount of food that's in the poult stomach. And so animals are feeding at record rates, leading to 400% increases in growth since the late 1950s. And that, along the speed in which the meat is put on these animals, and the concentration of these animals in the hundreds of thousands, my apologies, hundreds of thousands, has led to kind of increase of musculoskeletal damage and also psychopathologies, all the pecking that goes on in the course of this. So again, and this extends into even the way that animals are born. In order to produce animals that are pathogen-free against a whole list of pathogens, because they're so concentrated in such barns this way, the animals are basically the sows, the female hog are subjected to terminal hysterectomies, in which their uteri are taken out, and the animal is basically born inside these humidicribs doused with antibiotics. They're put in the upper right there. They're weaned in short order in order to get them out from underneath. I guess I have some sort of timer thing here that's not cooperating. Getting them out from underneath into the marketplace without these pathogens. Of course, involves, again, emphasizing the notion that animals are economic units first before they're living beings, or treated this way, and that the animals are basically, circumvent even the act of birth in order to preserve the business model that drives the emergence of these infections in the first place. Now, the thing is, it isn't just on farm. It extends out to the whole very nature of how capitalism imprints itself on the larger landscape. And it's forced when it develops these kinds of means by which to produce commodities on the cheap that doesn't lead to the preservation of landscapes. It increases the likelihood or the how easy it is to develop landscapes, and that leads to the contradiction of that. It drives the destruction of ecological landscapes by rewarding companies that can cheaply develop them. And that leads to the eating away at each species that it targets, leading to one species being replaced by another, one mineral replaced by another, one landscape by another, to such a point that the entirety of Earth gets scraped away by dint of the ecological impulses that are built into the underlying system. And this leads to expanding the kinds of animals that you exploit as domestic animals, the livestock. So here we have ostriches are being farmed, we have porcupines being farmed, we have alligators being farmed, we have fruit bats being farmed, we have the civet here that's when it eats these berries and craps them out, produces these coffee beans, the most expensive in the world at 1,000 US dollars per kiloliter. And then they're finding animals that are found that they never identified within the marketplace itself. So this is a short-nosed dogfish that was found in the Taiwanese market. So we have the totality of the ecology being subjected to the commodity logic. And it isn't just a runaway market. This is very much planned out in advance as part of a social good. The notion of turning totality of ecologies and also societies in general into means of profiteering. So, and the way it's done so is the state has a class character. And all sorts of different states do it in different ways, but primarily directed toward, in this case, generating genetically modified organisms to plant seeds in a way that undercuts the capacity of farmers to replant seeds left over from year to year. And but there are other ways in which even insurance companies are coming in this case, a Swiss insurance company coming into Nigeria to basically help Nigerian local capital basically turn what was a program in offering subsidies and loans to farmers into a private mechanism by which to profit off local farmers in this way. And so, in other words, the totality of this offers us that landscapes are increasingly globalized. And so here's Luke Bergman's group. They mapped out the percent of land surface in which is consumed abroad. And so he divided out in globalized croplands, pasturelands, and forests here, and then in the combination down here in the bottom here. And so in the blue, and it isn't just directly consumed, let's say in the green here, but also how are these landscapes contributing to other things of manufacturing and services in areas as well, as far as they are consumed abroad. So in other words, landscapes are globalized by these circuits of capital. And so on the top here, we have capital accumulation from croplands, pasturelands, and forests. And on the bottom, we have consumption in that direction, with in the red being more of the activity happening abroad and the blue happening within the region. And so what that means is that you have whole landscapes dedicated to not only supplying people elsewhere. It's here in the consumption here, we have southern Brazil. We have the landscape here in which it's growing food for export. Okay, that's a decision any country can make about how much to consume domestically and abroad. But we also see here that capital accumulation is also happening abroad. So in other words, southern Brazil is basically growing food for other people to consume elsewhere, and also the profits are being rolled over to companies that are not registered in Brazil. And this extends into the finance sector, right? We have the real economy and we have the finance economy. Real economy is how many bolts did we produce? How many apples did we grow out and export? Finance is a different thing entirely. It's dedicated toward basically making side bets on the real economy. And we see increasingly so much profit developing in that it's being used to support the real economy in a way that hasn't happened before. So we have a lot more here in the United States in this fern green. You have almost the entire economy that is increasingly supported uh, by um, by finance in a way that not the case in other countries, but increasingly so. Um, and this is driving some of the damage that we showed in previous slides. So this is Graziano Sedia's model. He had 8 different models showing that in different ways in which when this super rich investors, as he calls them, increase 1% in their wealth, it leads to, in these models, anywhere from 1% in the development of or flex crops in countries around the world to, in the short term here on the left, and in the long term, as much as 3%. Then he looked at the actual empirical data and showed that, in fact, we have as much as 10%, meaning every 1% that the super rich get richer leads to a 10% increase in in the amount of land that's dedicated toward flex crops, often at the expense of the a local population in terms of their ability to feed themselves. And of course, this has a profound impact on how we view how pathogens emerge. And this is where we separate ourselves from the typical One Health, which is entirely reasonable approach to things, right? You can look at how the environment and animal health and wildlife health and human health are interrelated with each other. It's in some sense, we're only returning back to notions that farmers and all sorts of other populations already knew long before the emergence of capitalism that indeed the local landscape had a profound impact on the health of their livestock and of their crops. And suddenly it's being presented as this big new thing, in part because what the sciences that emerged hand in glove with capitalism basically accepted the notion that these things were alienated from each other and that you could separate out human health from animal health. And it turned out to be such a blind spot that it led to allowed the emergence of multiple pathogens with the possibility of killing a billion people. So at the turn of the century, some of the intergovernmental agencies and some of the academics began to realize, well, we have to return to this notion that these things are interconnected. I mean, historically, they've been following this off and on for some time, but now it began to become so obvious. But the problem with just seeing at the level, at the place of the outbreaks, or just investigating ecologies and epidemiologies where an outbreak emerges, say in southern China or sub-Saharan Africa or for Zika in South America, is that the focus on what are called absolute geographies, where the actual virus emerges, misses all those relational geographies that we were talking about, right? Those maps by Bergman showing how capital accumulation happens one side of the world to the other. You miss those things. If you miss them, of course, it allows you to blame the country in which the virus first emerges, but you miss out on the bigger picture of how the actual virus emerged, how it actually emerged. And so you can end up missing out on how the ways and wherefores a pathogen emerges. So the example that I give here is that of H5N1, which clearly emerged in Guangdong in 1996 before spilling over into Hong Kong. And then the problem is that post-revolutionary China has become increasingly more of an open market. It's a little different open market than, say, some of the neoliberal countries, but it returned to pre-revolutionary dynamics by which Hong Kong served as the front of the store by which foreign direct investment would come in. And then, in essence, In this case, supplying Guangdong with this foreign direct investment, and that which subsequently changed the very nature that Guangdong produced its food. So, in other words, if four-fifths of the FDI coming through Hong Kong goes to Guangdong, then basically causality switches in the other direction as well, and Hong Kong isn't presented merely as an innocent victim of a terrible thing that happened in China, but in addition had contributed to the emergence of the pathogen by supplying the finance capital necessary for Guangdong to change its agriculture and lead to the emergence of not only H5N1, but also SARS-1 as well, emerged in Guangdong. So in other words, what that leads us to reconfigure our thinking about how pathogens emerge and in what way and what is the causality. And it means that maybe perhaps we might better consider places like New York and London and Rome and Hong Kong, which are the centers of capital that are supplying the capital necessary to lead to the deforestation and development that leads to the spillover events, may themselves be called epidemiological hotspots. And that reconfigures our notion of epidemiological causality, because it's not just what's happening on the ground. Some local forest cut into local farmers cut into a forest and you had a spillover event. And you have to ask, well, why were the farmers doing that? Were they driven off their land? Why were they driven off their land? How did that happen? Was it an influx of the foreign direct investment ag that we were that we were talking about before that led to them having to flee their local landscapes? And then sometimes, of course, as described in neoliberal Ebola and some of the other books, you have direct relationship between the increasing industrialization of the frontiers in which farming bleeds into what were more primary forests that leads to the emergence of pathogens. And you can go there. Various sciences are tracking the outcome of all this. I'm going to only go through a couple examples here. But basically, some of the work on the genetics of the swine flu H1N1 2009 showed that the genome, the influenza genome was segmented into all these different segments, and they trade their segments like card players on a Saturday night, right? Here, you take this, you take that, and so you have this reassortment events that occur. And we see in 2009 that almost all the different segments, the closest influenzas they were related to were influenzas that were circulating in hog on different continents entirely. So how do you get all those segments together? If you have an avian influenza, you can blame the wild waterfowl that fly from one part of the world to the other. You can't do that for hog. Hogs don't fly on their own. They don't have wings, except when we put them in planes, right? So in order to ship hogs from one side of the world to the other, you have to have the kind of capital that smallholders don't have. So this is entirely a condition or circumstance generated by the larger agribusiness who have that capacity. They're the only ones who can do that. But you can, it's not just my word about it, or there's some phylogeography work dedicated to tracking some of this. Some work by Martha Nelson's lab actually took all the evolutionary trees of all the different segments of the of swine influenzas, not just H1N1, but all of them, and then tracked the migration events through their trees, and found that very interesting differences here. These are the country of origin on the left for this migration matrix. This is the country of destination on the top here, and we see that we would expect China to be a primary source for swine influenzas, and in this case, at the time in which this was published about a decade ago, they were not, because almost all their swine was purchased domestically. And so we see here that the US and in some ways Canada, which are the largest exporters of swine around the world, sending swine onto those planes, are also the largest exporters of swine flu as well. And so a follow-up work looked at the swine flu H1N1 in 2009, and our group named the swine flu after the NAFTA Agreement. That's a North American Free Trade Agreement that was instituted in 1994, in which tariff and other barriers were taken off. And so you had companies like Smithfield not only ship swine into Mexico, but also set up their own piggeries down there, which forced whatever domestic producers in Mexico to either consolidate into larger swine operations or to sell their operations to the new internationally into the U.S. companies that were moving in. And that was our argument there, but you don't just need our group to tag such a thing. You could see it in the very genetics of the virus. And again, Nelson's group looked at it and showed that largely it was the U.S. and Canada that was seeding Mexican states with the highest levels of pork production with the influenzas that led to the H1N1 reassortment emerging in 2009. So, and we see this kind of continuing on. I mean, it hasn't, as we very much see from COVID, the necessity of the public health necessary to stop a pandemic requires you to entirely rejigger your system of production and public health in a way that would cut into the capacity for rolling over profit in a way that was deemed impermissible. So again, we fail. We refuse to learn the lesson as a matter of our preserving a system that causes the damage. And so we see here H5N1 in 2004 in the U.S. Here in this upper left matrix here, we have spillover events from wild bird, poultry, mammals, humans, domestic mammals, and cattle. Two into poultry, and we see here that the cow is this year the primary vector by which H5N1 is spilling over. We see here on the right here a migration matrix for from state to state, so Texas, South Dakota, and the like. And we can see the mapping of this originally ostensibly out of Texas and across the U.S. Because of the way that hog production is so geographically expansive that an outbreak in one part of the state the country can lead to outbreaks to other parts of the country in short order. And this was like from March to May, they founded 100 dairy farms, but since then it's been quite expansive, and not only spilling over our cows into poultry, but into all sorts of animals, and cats, and then of course farm workers as well. And farm workers are being not being tested in a way that they should be tested. And we've learned in the past month that, in fact, the spillover events into human farm workers is a regular event at this point. So we are really on the verge of potentially on a verge of another pandemic without knowing the case fatality rate. H5N1 in 1996 started off pretty damn harsh at about 50%. I think it went down. COVID-19 was about 2%. We don't know what the case fatality rate would be with this, but even a small case fatality rate, as we learned from COVID, if a small proportion of a very large number of people infected is still a very large number. So we learned that many millions of people were killed by COVID-19, and this seems to be a risk that we are willing to take again. But I'll offer a couple more examples about how the structure of the system leads to the very damage that we are concerned with. We have here most poultry and livestock do not breed on the farm. That's an old tale that's increasingly being replaced by the kind of breeding operations that happen off farm, off continent, in fact, in which you have a few breeders basically breed for kind of morphometric characteristics and not for immunity or anything like that. They don't know what viruses circulating or anything like this. And although they're trying to make those efforts to do so, it will likely not be very successful because pathogens evolve. So whatever thing you come up with in one year will be outsmarted by the virus in the following year. So, but what's happened is that the breeding operations have consolidated, much as the farms and the food companies. And so I think in 1989 there were about 10 or so poultry breeders, and by 2006 we were down to two major ones, Eric Johann Group in Germany and the Hendrix Genetics. Not only reduces the number of geneticists, but it also reduces the number of poultry breeding lines. So you reduce the number of the amount of diversity that you have necessary to basically block out circulating pathogens. But in addition, what you do is you remove natural selection as an ecosystem service by which the poultry on site can evolve in resistance to an outbreak. So let's say if you've seen pictures of a barn that's been wiped out by H5N1, you have a couple stragglers that are still there, and it might have been by luck, but it might be some quirk in their immunity that you would use these survivors as the progenitors for the next generation in order to develop immune resistance in real time. You cannot do that on an industrial farm. There's no breeding there whatsoever. And so in 2015, when there was an outbreak here in the US, they weren't able to develop a vaccine in time. So they were completely vulnerable to a deadly circulating pathogen. So in other words, this failure to develop immune resistance isn't some like weird disaster or weird problem that happened in any one year. It's built into the very model of industrial production. We do not do any breeding on site. And it's, of course, makes the populations of 15,000 turkeys in one barn or 250,000 layers that much more vulnerable, in part because they all have the same immune system. Virus gets in there and it'll burn right through it, and it ends up selecting for increasing deadliness of the virus as well. So this is all built in. And so why, given all this damage, why would the agribusiness be allowed to continue on? I mean, they know this is happening and they figured this out about 30 years ago. They realized that growing poultry in such concentrations in this way lead to all sorts of damage, including disease outbreak. And the way they dealt with it wasn't changing operations. It was distributing the damage and the pain. And so in the US and increasingly elsewhere, there's this one part of the vertical integration that is part of consolidating farms and the whole operations from breeding to meat packing. There's this one bit that it's not under the company roof anymore, and they spun it out, and it's the farmers themselves. They're contracted out, and so this whatever damage occurs on their barn is on their head, and it's not on the company's head. And this worked beautifully for the companies in 2015 in the outbreak that I was talking about. When H5N2 swept across the Midwest here in the US, those farmers that were directly hit by outbreaks had to swallow the loss of their poultry. And those in an effort to try to control the outbreak, the federal government began to cull birds that were in an area that an outbreak was happening. So those birds that were killed that was paid for by the U.S. federal taxpayer. So in other words, the companies didn't pay any of this out. And so because it doesn't hit them in the bottom line here, there's no impetus to change the system from this present mechanism by which you're growing also so many birds on the cheap so profitably, but also growing birds. It's all food for flu. You're growing these birds in a way that allows for the selection of these deadly diseases. So I know I've been talking quickly, but let me just wrap up here. Or I've been talking a lot. I apologize. Let me just wrap up here by talking about what to do about this. It's basically reversing what industrial ag is doing, reintroducing agroecology as a concept into production. And so you have multiple examples. I mean, it's not enough to do some of these things. We have on the upper left, Belo Horizonte, developed a system in which local farmers that were doing agroecology were allowed to basically sell directly to customers inside the city of a 2.5 million people, right? So they developed a program by which they could do so, cutting out the usurious middlemen that would cause agroecologically grown produce to cost that much. And so this is the effort of decades of the city to develop this kind of thing. And it says that agroecology can be scaled up or scaled out to cover millions of people. And it's not
Yeah,
just some small farms.
sorry,
Yes.
Rob. Can you explain to us what is agroecology? Because I'm not sure
Yes.
everybody's on board.
Sure, sure. It's just what the words seem to imply, agroecology, agriculture and ecology together. And so, you're seeing your farm as being reintegrated into the broader landscape in which you're growing animals and your crops. So it does matter what water is nearby. You don't want to just plant pesticides everywhere that will spill over, or fertilizers that will spill over into the local rivers. Here in the US, the state of Iowa, half the rivers are not swimmable because they've been so polluted. You want to have healthy soils, right? So in order to grow food that's nutritious, so soil isn't just a place where you stick a seed and then slop on fertilizer and pesticide. You're treating the agriculture as a part of the natural economy in which agriculture has long developed, right? It isn't. You're not in the business of making widgets or building cars. Agriculture is foundationally different from all those things. It's inherently dependent upon the natural world in ways that is foundational to our ability to reproduce ourselves as a society. And so agroecology, however, isn't just about the soil, it's about the greater society as well. And so, in order for farmers to do these kinds of things, whether to be able to sell in local markets or in the upper right here, allow their birds to reproduce on site, right, leading to the natural immunity to circulating pathogens. You need the farmer autonomy, the capacity for farmers and the communities to make decisions about what to grow and how. So this is why an agroecology that doesn't is apolitical, meaning is not imbued with the notions of the power of farmers and local communities to make decisions this way, won't be able to break free or allow the kind of interventions that would stop pathogens from emerging in the first place. So this was my point of the slide. Here's a farm in New York, and then on the right here is a Niger farmers cooperative of thousands of farmers feeding millions of people. But they run the show in a way that agribusiness does not, and they are able to make decisions about what to grow and where. If they have extra seed, they could bank it in the local seed bank, a grain bank that the cooperative runs and owns. Processing is done locally. It's not shipped from one state to another out of the farmer's control. And so all those things of returning local decision making would allow the changes on farm that would increase the likelihood of blocking pathogens from emerging in the first place. So those things are fundamentally related to each other. And there's a lot of work we need to do in that direction. And, there's a lot of technical work needs to be done. If we had people's republics all over the place and gave people the right to be able to make decisions about what they do, you still need to figure out the ways and means by which to return to an agroecological system, right? And certainly the farmers themselves have a lot to say about this and a lot of knowledge about this. But there's an offer that scientists and researchers can offer is kind of the technical assistance in this direction. One of our groups, Midwest Healthy Ag, this is just one example of that. We looked at the spread of COVID through the Midwest, and we found that we developed the kind of this map here of this is a geographically weighted regression, and these are 50-kilometer hexagons that are tiled across the Midwest, and you can see that these are the relationship between these variables including the amount of regenerative operations, more agroecological operations, and the more conventional production. And we found, and then if it's orange, you have a positive relationship between that variable and the amount of COVID in the first year. And in blue, you have a negative relationship. And we can see generally, the general models show that those areas that had more regenerative farms had less COVID. And the reason had to do with that the conventional farms were directly related to the commodity chains that we've been talking about this entire time. And so COVID came in along those commodity chains. So even areas that were in the hinterlands of the Midwest had direct contact with COVID on the coast and were hit by COVID earlier than those areas that were more locally bounded. And but this map shows that it depends on where you are, right? So you're in Michigan here, you can have a negative relationship between regenerative production and COVID and a positive relationship in the Dakotas. That opens up a whole thing, but why is that, right? So you get into the world of being able to assist with regional planning. Different places have different factors and combination of factors that are leading to the emergence or susceptibility to disease. But the thing is that this kind of work, which is not going to be enough. In the end, really, it's a political problem, right? And ultimately, if you're going to have things like farmer autonomy, if you're going to have the capacity to move towards something like Belo Horizonte, having entire cities organized around feeding poor and working people in city with food that's grown by agroecological farmers on the farmer outskirts. It's a political problem. It requires the notion of power in notions of political organization. And so, a bunch of, nerds like me doing modeling stuff isn't going to be enough. You need everyday people to organize both in city and in the rural areas together to demand that agribusiness remove itself in such a way to allow good food to be grown and produced and consumed. Instead of being used as merely a means by which to extract profit, not only to the damage of nutrition and to people's health, but to the likely selection for pathogens that emerge that kill a billion people. And so our group developed a model, dedicated towards showing the ways and means of strategy by which perhaps farming groups and public health groups can push back against agribusiness. And it isn't merely a matter of showing that this stuff will work, but actually helping people, at least doing our minor part to helping organize the world to push back for a better world and for a world in which people can be fed with good food and also not be killed by the pathogens that circulate among our livestock and crops. And so that's it. And as was described here, some of the books that we've been involved in, and on the bottom right are organizations that have been participating in, engaged in a kind of science for the people. And I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Rob, for this presentation. And some of the parts, I'm sure, was a bit technical, but there will be an opportunity for you to have access to materials that has been the object of today's research, today's presentation. I was wondering, as citizens of the world, you are in the United States, we are in Italy, but when you talk about agroecology, I'm sure some of you may relate to some projects that are local here. The idea of linking farmers directly to the consumer. Is there something citizens, not consumers, can do to revert this transformation? You call the transformation of planet Earth into planet farm, with this industrialization of food production that is brutalizing animals. Is there some behaviors we can adopt, maybe on an individual level? I know you focus on the struggle of public health, farmers, political activists. I mean, so this is about power, it's about finance, it's about capitalism, but also, is there something at the individual level we can do? Like, I don't know, stopping eating meat or uh, whatever.
Yeah. I have to say, the typical response on the kind of structural analysis is to kind of look their nose down on individual things, but I don't necessarily agree with that. I think it's a gateway by which people can start to get a sense of of um, of control, a sense of that they can participate and make some changes. And but as long as that's goes hand in hand with the notion that the bigger picture has to change as well. And it's a hard moment to think of that, right? I
Yeah,
won't go into any details, but across the world we have increasingly kind of authoritarian kind of regimes that are kind of emerging all sorts of in all the continents in a way that makes seems like exercise of political power is difficult. But it's always going to be the case, even when the neoliberals are in power, and they still are. But it's always going to be a difficult situation when a lot of the money and political
yeah,
might is in the hands of the larger companies, right? So we have to start somewhere, right? So you start, you start local, and you start whether in your neighborhood or
yeah,
I mean, Europe has had a reputation of being much more integrated with its rural areas and
yeah,
having a more rurality, meaning a sense of that even if you live in a city, you have either cousins in the area, or you have a there's a history of visiting the rural landscape. Italy's landscape, of course, is marvelous. Not to take away also there, you also have industrial brutalization as well.
yeah,
We're not going to idealize things to the point though that the reality of it is it's a mixed bag, right? But to have notions of rural life being more than merely a place of productivity. And
yes,
that's a big deal because in the US, we suffer that greatly. Whole entire counties, whole parts of states, which are bigger than countries elsewhere, have been abandoned to industrial production and very few people there other than those to supervise the machines, right?
yeah,
And life and the environmental damage that I mentioned in Iowa and elsewhere has led to terrible outcomes in a place you don't want to live, and children flee. And so there has to be some sort of, uh, détente, a peace, a truce between urban and rural, which are often set against each other in a kind of divide and conquer. And we have to understand that those of us who live in the city, we are absolutely dependent upon food being produced elsewhere. And we
so,
want to eat food that's healthy and local, and so there is a kind of in the past couple decades, there's been a bourgeois revolution opposing crappy food, right? So in the U.S., you had people like Pollan and all sorts of other Michael Pollan and other people, and you'll have your Italian versions of that, I'm sure, of people saying we need to eat better. We reject industrial food. We're going to eat better, even if we have to pay more. Now, the industrial systems had trouble with that at the beginning, but they solved that, right? They bought up all the organic companies, right?
right,
Phil Howard's work at Michigan State University, he maps out all the ways that companies
yeah,
are ate up all the organic companies as well, right? So they don't care if your country is split between poor and rich, and the poor have to eat crappy food, and the rich want to eat good food. They don't mind because now they have both sides covered with that, right?
so, yeah,
So this is why I think consumerism isn't enough. Like you're not going to buy your way out into a system that's
yeah,
better if they own all the companies. However, I do think and believe that making considerable effort to help support the kind of localization of food, regional food systems, and
mhm,
and Europe still has a lot of that going on, I think, and to try to develop a means by which good local foods are produced and supported, and is a really great step forward. It's hard to because industrial food is so convenient, whether you're eating at a local fast food joint or buying industrial food from a supermarket. They make it very convenient. Not very good, but very convenient. So
Yeah.
to be able to weave in ways and means of cooking at home, and I mean, it's a very American thing to have abandoned a lot of that, not entirely, but there is the terrible notion of the Americanization of Europe in the food habits that one would want to avoid at all costs because of the damage to health, well-being, and to your
Yeah.
local regional food systems.
So
So yeah,
you mean that we need to go not only beyond one health, but also beyond individual behavior as a response against this system that is producing pandemics
yeah,
through deforestation, animal farming, and in this regard, um, you seem to convey the message of reframing problems. So, following your talk, um, thinking about pandemics like COVID-19, everybody thinks about the hotspots like the Wuhan market, right?
mhm,
But
yes,
you ask us to reframe and rethink the pandemic, looking at the financial centers on the one hand, who are financing the activities that produce eventually pandemic in a cascade effect. Plus, you ask us to rename even the pandemics,
yes.
giving names that may sound provocative for some, but as you show, they are evidence-based. So you mentioned neoliberal Ebola, you
Mhm.
mentioned the NAFTA flu. NAFTA is a North American Free Trade Agreement signed by the U.S., Canada, and Mexico. And also, you come up with another funny name, the Bojo variant of COVID-19. Can you explain to us what?
Yeah, yeah. These names are exact. You got it exactly right. These names are both provocative and evidence based. Bojo was the name that the British had for Boris Johnson, who was the conservative prime minister during the time in which COVID emerged and spread. And you know, it is there is an element of satire and needling about naming a particular variant of COVID that emerged in England at the time. See, that's the thing. The terrible moment of basically blaming China alone, and China does have its role in this, but it basically is an attempt to wash all the countries attempting to wash their hands of the subsequent damage. And if you're in a business of your neoliberal production that basically minimizes the amount of funding you offer for public health and health surveillance and animal health in your own borders, then when a virus arrives and causes major damage, including killing hundreds of thousands of people, then the blood of these people on your hand is on your hands, and you are basically responsible for the outcome. And if you allow a virus, if by abandoning the the zero COVID practices of trying to do everything you can to keep as few people infected as possible, and you allow people to go back to work, and not for their sake, but largely to keep capital circulating,
Yeah,
then the damage to people's health, whether through long COVID or just flat out death, is on the hands of the political decision makers.
yeah,
Now, I am needling Boris Johnson here, but clearly it's a system-wide problem, right? Here, it's hard to when you're trying to get a message across about systemic things. How do we point out? I mean, laying it on him, I think was well deserved, but also I would try to make it more on the lines of the NAFTA flu and the neoliberal Ebola to speak about how systems of
the
of
system.
of
Yeah,
uh, production and response and public health are driving the worst of damage. But
yes,
that is the reason why to reorient, as you got at, reframe the nature of the problem and not just say it's swine flu, that it's the hog's fault, as if
yes,
the hog had anything to do with this, right? Other than being a vessel. But to
yeah,
say systemically, how do we organize ourselves as a society and how do we make ourselves vulnerable that way?
exactly. And talking about the need to transform our economic system in order to serve a food system that could be based on agroecology, health, uh, people, animals, and the environment, we also need to think about production. I'm sure if an economist would hear us talking about the subject, um, would maybe say, but you cannot feed the world unless there are agribusiness corporations. What's your take on this, Rob?
Yeah, well, I would say that yeah, it's been plenty of work, and my colleague Jahi Chappelle, who's a political agroecologist at Michigan State University, wrote a book on the Belo Horizonte example that I gave of Brazil and their system, and he has a couple chapters in his book, I think 2018 book on exactly addressing these issues, and largely, whatever famines that are occurring around the world isn't not because we're not producing enough calories or enough food. It's entirely about distribution.
Exactly.
And and when you allow an agribusiness to come in and kick farmers off their farm, then the local people don't have access to the food that you export out of the country. So, agribusiness is not merely a source of producing calories. It's a means by which to remove food out of people's mouths. And particularly across the global south, but elsewhere. In fact, there's been studies here of rural areas in the United States and where there is great malnutrition and inability to get enough calories. And it's remarkable that in the farming communities, you have people who are hungry. And it isn't just because they're producing food that's inedible, meaning they're producing food that's for processing, right? For as ingredients in processed foods,
Yeah.
but they do not have access to that food. That is not grown there. So our group is involved in trying to, if in reintroducing agroecology into the rural areas here in the U.S., it's as much to make sure that rural people are able to get food. So it doesn't work. That argument doesn't, from the economist side, does not work at the level of local situations and also globally. We do make enough food, and agribusiness holds on to that grand narrative of we need to feed the world as basically their last point that they are sticking to about why they produce food this way is the way to go, and they are desperate to step out from underneath that last notion, because that's why a lot of agribusiness are moving to try to support regenerative agriculture,
Right.
which is a kind of an agroecology, but without the politics, right?
Yeah.
It's dedicated toward perhaps tweaking what are called the modes of production, how you grow things, in order to preserve what are called the relations of production, meaning that they continue to sweep in the profit of production, even if they, for instance, will allow a little bit more leeway on healthier soils, but not necessarily in the business of healthier societies, right? They want to continue to exercise command on rural areas in such a way that they continue to reap the most of the profit that comes out of production.
Thank you so much for this presentation. Thank you again. Um,
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And if you give me a second here, I'll try to find that article quickly. I know I don't want to waste people's time, but
so they are,
um,
they are greeting you, Rob.
oh,
Yeah.
great, great, great. Good to see you. Good to see everybody.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for coming here.
Yeah.
I
Send us
appreciate it.
materials. We are happy to read more about it.
Okay, I will do so. And I appreciate it, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks for being so patient to hear me blab on a bit. And
I was.
it's a delight to be here with you, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
All
Bye.
right, take care.